So welcome to this. This is the 7th or the 8th. I've lost count. I think it's about the 7th review of the book, The African Gods General. Some of you have just been here since the beginning, and I truly appreciate that. So today with me on the review, I have Chineye Oragu. Chineye, forgive me if I didn't say that name properly. As an Igbo girl, I should know how to say that, but that's not always the case. Chineye is with us today. And then we also have a friend and neighbor, ex-working partner, and gisting buddy sometimes, Sonyade Okoli. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you for having us.
I'm so glad to have you. I'm so excited about this conversation today. We're looking at the stories of Father Michael Iweni Tansi. This will be the first. I'm excited about this one because this is almost, I don't know if I would call it a deviation, because of the 13 or so persons that we have in this book, only one what do we call ourselves? Pentecostals, evangelical, what else? Protestant, charismatic, all those names. This is the only person that, isn't in that, he steps away from that, and he comes from what we know as what we know today as the Orthodox Church. He was in the Roman Catholic Church, and I'm so glad that somebody outside of our usual is featured, because we want to see how God really works, and maybe just demystify some of our wrong beliefs and understanding about the Roman Catholic Church. I think at some point in my growing up years, I think I was Roman Catholic. I don't know. I went to Roman Catholic Church. They took me to Roman Catholic Church. I observed what I needed to observe during my time there, and I have family that's Roman Catholic, but that was not to be my path. But growing up as well, we have this banter. The Roman Catholics and the non-Roman Catholics, they have this thing going on. Today, my understanding today and sphere of people is changed a bit, but I remember growing up, it was a bit different. There were always, you don't know what those Roman Catholics are up to. Then the other ones will say, those Penty rascals, I don't know, they're just here for a show and they're deceiving people. And there's always this constant bickering. Their God is not the real God. They've missed the way. Nobody wants to agree that God is big enough and large enough, and God doesn't belong to any one denomination, So so because of this, I'm happy that we see how we get the opportunity to see how God is working through different people, different creeds, different values, and how many different things and different beliefs find their roots in him. And so it takes away that overconfidence that we're the only one. Yes, we are special, but we're not the only one. God's heart is large enough to take everyone. And then we're going to look at Emmanuel Omotunde, a very notable person for those who have done some bit of Nigerian Christian history. Quite notable. He, as we've learned, he's made his impact over the years and did some phenomenal things in Nigeria, and contributed in some ways to the growth, to the development of Christianity in Nigeria. So sometime this week, I was flipping through this book called, I don't know if you can see it. If you can see that book, yeah, that's, it's called The Church History in Plain Language. And this is hardly about anything African. This is about church history, Roman Catholic age, how the Protestant movement broke away, just telling us about the general church history. I decided to flip through it and just look at remind myself of some of the things that I've studied in it before. And they made a reference to one of the persons that we've studied, which isn't today, but also just we're telling the story of how the church has evolved over time and how everybody has contributed to some extent, and the mistakes they've made. So I've just been so proud that there's so much work that people have done on capturing this, and I'm grateful that in Nigeria we're capturing ours, we're discussing ours. It's not going to be, thus far has it been lost, and no more would it be lost on us. So that's by way of opening remarks. So without further ado, I really want to dive into this exciting and exhilarating conversation. Again, I invite you to make your comments, put in the chat. I'll be reading the chat. Any questions, we'll take the questions, or even just share your thoughts, your agreements or your disagreements, wherever you stand. It's okay. We're open enough to hear your views because we're here to learn and to share. And, so on that note, I just want to say thank you, Holy Spirit. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I thank you for the gift of life, and I thank you for the gift of knowing you, Jesus, and walking with you. I thank you so much for the gift of salvation. If you had never died for us, I don't know, I cannot imagine that life. I thank you because we are assured of eternity with you, because you have promised it to all those who believe in your name. And I also appreciate you for the work for the things that we benefit from your sacrifice while we're on earth. We're not just waiting till eternity to enjoy, being sons and daughters, but every day in our lives, you protect us from so much. You teach us and you guide us. You walk beside us and you shower us with your love. I thank you because in this time, you open up our mind to show us who you are. You will show us another dimension of yourself beyond what we have known. We're moving forward in you. We're not moving forward in the knowledge of books and everything, but we're moving forward in discovering who you are. All of this is for your glory. All of this is for your name. All of this is for your fame, Jesus. All of this is for your kingdom. So I praise you that we get to be partakers of everything that is of life and godliness that you give us with. Bless our hearts and bless our hearing. Speak through all of us, because we're no experts. We're coming here to share what we understand from what we read and what we know of you in the time that you have given us to know you. Thank you, Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen. Okay, we'll dive right in. And first person we're going to start with is Reverend Father Michael Iweni Tansi. And I want to start this conversation by asking a general question to Sonyade and Chineye. Just like, I'd like to get a sense of your takeaway, your general overview when you read this story of this great man we're going to be talking about. What's your general sense and your general overview? What hit you the most, or what are some things that kind of just came across to you that you can share with us?
Okay, if I could go first. Hello, sure, everyone. Okay, so talking about Iweni Tansi, one of the things that struck me the most is his piety and his striving for perfection. And that was what almost everyone noted about him, that he made the pursuit of perfection one of the guiding principles of his life. Other virtues and qualities they had were humility, was very humble, very self-effacing. He was very diligent. And, as we go on to review and talk about him, you see that he said that he was not the most brilliant person in his class. But what he tried to do was to ensure that in everything he did, there was excellence. He tried to be an excellent person. So the fact that he gave up a lot to chase the kingdom of God, the fact that, he sacrificed, as we go on, we see it's almost like he sacrificed his mom, because he wanted to follow God and, go with what God had told him to do with his life. It's something that is very remarkable for me.
Thank you for that. Thank you. All right. Sayadi.
Thanks. So I'm not going to repeat what Chinea said, just to say I agree with everything she's just said. And I'll say a little bit more about what struck me about the context, which is the opening of the book. The writer, first of all, just in line with what you just did, Roberta, started by establishing the fact that Catholicism is part of Christianity, is no less a form of Christianity, and brings as much value to Christendom as all the other denominations. And, essentially speaking about doing away with our denominationalism and the superiority some denominations may feel over the others. The second thing that struck me was the context in which he was born, which is, in the time where the Catholic missionaries had been trying to evangelize the region. And the first thing that hit me was that the missionaries were purchasing slaves to build a village. So of course, when I read that, it's like, okay, take a step back. And it tells you how complex so many of these things are, in that the way the model that the Catholic missionaries were using at that time and in that area was to essentially establish Christian villages. And the way they thought they could do this was buying back slaves, getting them to build the village and live in that village. So it's almost like they're the initial natives of that village. And they're the questions as to the merits and demerits of that strategy, especially when you think it was their way of talking about Christ. So I just found that really interesting.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, you have started to inch into the book, and I'm getting excited, into the review, and I'm getting excited. So just picking back off what you said, their understanding of how they practice Christianity, I found it really interesting. And I think somewhere in the book, it's one of the evolution of slave trade, all the activities and the events and the arguments that led up to the devolution or the ending of slave trade, where, the Roman Catholics or the church came in and they thought they were doing a good thing. And they really, to the best of their understanding or their, the best of their understanding and revelation at the time, they bought slaves and they had the slaves build a community where they would live in. And somebody got up and asked, but you're also perpetuating because there's the law of demand and supply. If you're going to be buying slaves, somebody will keep supplying you slaves, even though your argument is that you're trying to, free the slaves. And I think that was the beginning of some wake-up call for them to rethink their approach. And I say that because when I look at things, I see a lot of that pattern where we start out with very noble ideas, very noble, but not quite there yet. And it behooves on us to be open to receive correction and direction when somebody, imagine, I'm investing my money buying slaves so I can let them go, and you're challenging me. Somebody will feel slighted. I know somebody will feel slighted. Okay, so just moving on. The author gives a narrative of the background of Christianity in Nigeria at the time, especially Christianity or the lack thereof, or the introduction of Christianity into the southeast of Nigeria. I'd like us to just touch a little bit on what we've read and what we've come to understand. We're talking about the Roman Catholic Church's penetration to the southeast of Nigeria, and we know that it's almost like a default. Somebody sees you as an Igbo person, there's an assumption that you're Roman Catholic, or you were Roman Catholic, or somebody in your family is Roman Catholic, because it's not possible. Igbo people are Roman Catholics. I never really, the thing used to bother me growing up. I'm like, why do they always just assume I was Roman Catholic? we're not the only ones. Igbos are not the only Roman Catholics in this country, but why is that? It's been interesting. So I'd just like to ask, Chinenye, do you want to take a stab at that one? How did this all come about? How do we have that name and reputation?
Okay. So from what we have read, we see that in the 1870s, the Holy Ghost Fathers, came in to the eastern parts of Nigeria and found that evangelization here was, easier, because it says it was more conducive. And because of that, they stayed and continued evangelizing. But what we're going to see now is how did it take firm roots and how did it grow and cover the other eastern part. So what had happened was that when they came in, they started buying slaves and Christianizing them and then freeing them. And one of the purpose of doing this was because it also afforded them cheap labor to build their missions. So that's why they went for slaves. And in so doing, they said they are Christian villages. But they found out along the line that it was not enough, because these slaves were like the lower class people in the community. And as such, they were not able to spread or have far-reaching effects with their evangelization. And they said, okay, what do we do? And they now decided, let's go for the upper class. And then they began to preach to the upper class. They were trying to convert them, and they converted a few of them. And they converted one of the chief of Aguleri, Idigo. And when they converted him, you know how it is, they convert him and he easily brings his friends. And then these people actually have a lot of slaves under their control. And so, spontaneity, you see the numbers rising. So they were happy with that. But after some time, they realized there was another issue again, that these upper class people are not educated enough, are not in government, and therefore they could not change certain things like human sacrifices, traditional practices, slavery. They were not able to do that because they do not have the position, they do not have the education. And also there was the issue of people saying that you're buying slaves and you say that slavery is not good. So it's almost like a contradiction. So they had to move away from this strategy to another strategy. And they said, okay, education is the way to go. And then they went through education. Now, what made them successful was the fact that when they started building schools, establishing schools and having people come in, they ensured it was free. So it's important to note at this point that the CMS had been in the East 30 years before the Roman Catholics came. But the Catholics, what they had now done was, apart from making the education free, they ensured that the secular subjects, in quotes, were taught in their schools. Why schools run by CMS did not allow that. Not only that, they taught in local language, while Roman Catholic schools taught in English language. So because of all this, even people that wanted their children to have a better education, that is people from CMS, Anglicans, now even moved their children to Roman Catholic schools. And of course, the schools began to expand. And then the colonial government was very appreciative of this policy, because what has happened, or what was happening, was that you're producing people that can be used in government, that can be used to further their agenda. And so through the school system, they were now able to, propagate the Roman Catholic Church in most parts of the East.
All right, thank you. Sonia, did you want to add something to that?
No, to be honest, I think that's she's covered it, that in terms of the strategy. But I noticed Uche's point about buying slaves to free them. And I think the thing to add there is that they bought them, used them as cheap labor. So it wasn't just to free them, they did use them as cheap labor to build their villages as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because there was some benefits to them. It wasn't
Yes.
completely altruistic. They
Altruistic,
benefited.
absolutely.
And if you look at it from the mission headquarters, they know that you buy slaves. They would, I don't know, they have some expectations of you because you have resources that you have bought, and they expect slaves were never treated as anything perfect human.
Yes.
Slaves were never treated as anything like that. So were never properly rewarded. They were not treated well, you know, were property. So,
yes.
Okay. So I think going on to the next question that I wanted to ask, what was the role? I wanted to look at how the colonial administration contributed to this spread or inhibited the spread of the Roman Catholic Church. And if you can also just touch a bit on or emphasize a bit more on the competition that existed, because there was a competition between the Roman Catholic who were new into the area and the CMS, which is the Church Missionary Society from England, because England, the UK is Anglican, predominantly, or traditionally Anglican. You know, there was this, you know, that at that time too, they were fighting over ownership of territories in Africa. So how did that have an effect on their evangelical work? Was it completely for the sake of Jesus Christ?
Your two questions are actually linked, in that it was all about domination for whatever reason. So you've got the Catholics, the Anglicans, and the colonialists all trying to spread their dominance in these regions for their various reasons. So if I take the second one first, the Anglicans and the Catholics were competing for people, competing for their own quote unquote brand of Christianity to take dominance over the other. And as Chineye said, though education was a strategy used by both groups, because the Catholics made theirs free, and the Catholics were also more amenable to what government wanted, because the government wanted them to teach practical subjects like maths and English and accounting, etc. So the products of the educational institutions were of use and value to them. And when we think about the government at the time, the government was obviously under colonization. So this was not the local government, but the British government, basically. So the Catholics were amenable to their desires and worked with them and tailored their educational program to fit what the government wanted. But the Anglicans did not do that. They thought that that was all very secular and tried to keep their own educational more focused on, I guess, spiritual matters rather than secular matters. And then vis-a-vis the colonial government, I think the Catholics felt that they were more an impediment than anything, because one, they were very much about the economics, but two, also the way some of their representatives conducted themselves, you know, with alcohol and womanizing, etc., etc. It was going against what they were trying to represent as what a refined Christian person was, how they were meant to live their lives.
All right, thank you for that. So that last point you made is quite interesting, because, you know, I watch all these period pieces talking about way back whenever, and it will typically be the church represented will really be the Anglican, the Roman Catholic churches, and the ministers. You know, for the longest time, I had a problem with the producers of these shows, of these movies, because I thought they were out to what's the word now? I forget the word, but I'll explain it. They were out to drag Christianity down and make Christianity and ministers of the gospel look like hypocrites. People who were fake, who were abusing the people, taking advantage of the people, being pretentious. and using the name of a fake God that doesn't exist, or some religion, you know, as they say, religion is the opium of the masses. So use it and get them, whip them into shape. And so I always struggled watching it. I wondered, is this the only narrative they have about ministers of the gospel, or is the Roman Catholic Church that bad, or the Anglicans, the Orthodox churches, are they that bad? It's over the years, more recently, as I've been reading the book that I showed, the church history, and even this book, that I realized that at the time, the criteria for entering into ministry was so low, and a lot of them weren't even taught, especially in the Roman Catholic Church. What I found, actually in the Orthodox Church, they weren't really taught the Bible. They didn't have sound theology. I think you needed to have gone to a certain level, certain height, to be taught sound theology. And that's why you see this disconnect. You have people who are, I forget what they are called, lay ministers in the church, and they're out in the pubs, they're drunk, they're sleeping with all kinds of women, they're extorting money from people, and they have this belief that because they are ministers in the Roman Catholic Church, therefore they are to be revered and they're above the law. But I thank God for understanding. Now I can stand and watch those movies and not feel so offended. Now I have knowledge. I know that it was the context of the time, even though I still believe to a great extent they're not trying to promote the gospel or tell the truth about the gospel. Right, so we go closer to introducing the man in focus. And I want to talk about, there was I think Chineye had alluded to it, the arrest of the king at the time by the colonial administration, actually by the colonial administration. And an incident had happened in the community where a company was set up, and then it ended up with some people being arrested. Two of the persons were the king, who had introduced the Roman Catholics into his community. And the second person is Mr. Tansi's father. And there were other people that were arrested as well, but those are the two people that were of interest to us. What would you have to say about that incident? Because I think that's just a sweet story to tell. We shouldn't miss out on what led to that, what was the context, because it draws out who we are as a people, what was happening versus our relationship or the understanding of the colonial administrators at the time. Who'd like to, any one of you want to take that?
Okay, I can take that.
Sure.
Okay, so what had happened then is that, we're under the British colonial rule, and they usually gave charters to companies to trade. And in 1870, they had given the charter to the Royal Niger Company to trade in that in Aguleri, and by trading in oil, palm oil. So what had happened was that the company had barrels and barrels of oil, and they stored it in their site, on their site. And one person, an Onwu Rume, had roasted yam one day, farmer, and decided he wanted to eat it with some palm oil, which is not bad. We all know how roasted yam and palm oil can go taste. So he goes to where the barrels are stacked, takes a knife, punctures one of the barrels just to take a little bit of oil, and then he starts gushing out. Instead of, I guess, owning up, going to say, I'm sorry, this is what happened, he ran away. So he ran away. The company came out, their officials came out, saw this, they were very angry. And next thing, they burnt down the village, they sacked even the neighboring villages, just to make a point. And this was really, not the best. So the villagers, the chiefs of the village, went to the company, the Royal Niger Company, to talk about the matter. They tried to, reach an agreement. But in going there, what happened was they arrested these chiefs. There were 12 in number. One of them was that chief, Idigo, who was one of the first converts. And a man called Tabansi, who was Tansi's father. So they were arrested and taken to Asaba. They were not treated properly, and they were kept for as long as 4 years. indeed, when the chief came out of prison, he died 8 days later. But it was a very harrowing experience for these people. And that was it, basically. It was a turning point. And the after effect of that event was that the people wanted to ensure that their words went to school and got good education, because they felt if we had good education, we'll be able to relate with this Europeans better, manage the situation better. You will know your rights, basically, and how to defend them. So we'll see how that relates to Tansi later on.
Okay. Sonia, did you depend there?
Yeah, I think that it's really just to highlight the last point was that really made the communities have a greater appreciation for the importance of education, because I think they just felt helpless. Had they been educated, had they been able to match up, so to speak, with these colonialists, then they wouldn't have had such a negative experience. So it drove the desire for more education within those areas.
Yeah, thank you for that. And another thing, the story is about a man who was eating his yam. We don't know if it's boiled or roasted, but I'll go for roasted yam because that just seems like the right thing to do in a village. And I think in the communal way of living, you just borrow here, you take there, you don't really ask permission. It's not a big deal. It's just a little palm oil. It wasn't considered as stealing by our people. But of course, Oyibo does not see it that way. You're taking something that doesn't belong to you without permission. So very different cultural contexts that we're coming from. And it didn't help. The man too didn't use much sense, because he punctured the barrel in a very wrong place, which made it to gush out. And the British the administration, the colonial masters, they didn't quite, what I was pained that they didn't quite handle it. They wouldn't do that to that extent today, but they didn't quite handle it well, because they just thought, you know what, you're a thief, your entire village, you're thieves, you're bad people, we'll deal with you like criminals. And it was just about a barrel of oil, 1 barrel of oil. The village was burnt. People were jailed for 4 years. The king, imagine the king who brought in, made the way for Christianity to come into that place. His people hated him because in introducing Christianity, he abandoned all the traditional worship, all the traditional rituals and practice. So of course his people were already against him. Then the white men that he introduced to the community jailed him. I felt for him. I really felt his emotions, and I just wondered, how he made it through those 4 years that he didn't even, I guess maybe he was like, I'm not going to die in this place. I will not die. I will die on my own soil, in my own place. And so that was interesting for us. And as mentioned as well, this was a resolve that made Iweni Tansi's father resolve that, by this time he'd already had many children, but he decided that education was progress. We cannot move forward in this life. This is how they turned their challenge into positive. And, then shortly after that, he had Iweni Tansi. Michael Iweni Tansi was a child born after his harrowing experience in the Asaba, in prison. And he was adamant that this child was going to get an education that nobody else in the family had. So he was the first in his family, and the first of many at that time to get educated. And he went to the Roman Catholic school, which was already a school set up in the community. As Chineye explained earlier on, they built communities, and you belonged in the community. Everything that had to do with the faith, with the Christian faith, revolved around that community. Okay, so I want to move forward to talk about Iweni Tansi himself. what do we know about him as a child when when he's introduced on the scene? What do we know about him? What are the qualities or the traits that stand out? And how is he really introduced to us? What were the markers of his early life? And I guess I'm tying that question to say, how does he find himself on this path of priesthood?
Well, let's go first. I think what was clear from his very early years is that he loved God and he loved to be in God's presence. So he was known as a child. Apparently, his other, contemporaries were just really taken about how much time he would spend in prayer, and just really pushing for the things of God. Chine also mentioned just his diligence, whatever he did to the best of his ability. And I think he gives a different meaning to living one's best life, because he just did his absolute best in anything that he did do right from childhood, and that followed him right through to his passing.
Okay, to add to that, one of the narrations states that even as a boy of 12 years, you see him praying and crying. And the question was, what sin has he committed, or what wrong has happened to him that's making him cry? And the only conclusion the writer could have was that it was just the cry of a soul that loved God, that was in rapture of God. And it's really, really notable because most times you find out that we experience this later in life, maybe as teenagers or as adults, but this was someone that had, just experiencing God on that level. So that was, commendable.
Didn't realize
okay.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself. So jumping forward to him at 16, 17, we're told that he studies to become a teacher. And at 16 or 17, he's finished. 16, 17, what we understand, you should just be about starting your A-levels, but we're told that he qualified as a teacher at the time, and he got his first teaching assignment. I'm thinking, you're a teenager, you should still be in school. Why? How are you at 16, 17, old enough, mature enough, or understand anything enough to be considered a teacher? Times really have changed. If anybody has some, insight into that, I would love to hear it. But yeah, and then he moves on. At the age of 21, he's made headmaster. Again, I'm shocked. I'm headmaster at 21. I hadn't even finished uni at 21. I hadn't figured out. And you have this responsibility of an entire school at that young age. And just like, I see somebody had their hand up. Do you have a question, or was that just a technical glitch? Okay, the hand has gone.
It really is a case of, in the line of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, because you've got to think of the level of literacy then was like close to zero. So if he's got some level of education, then he's in a position to teach those what he already knows, you know what I mean, and pull people up. But you're right, I must admit, when I saw 21, his headmaster, not only that, he was meant to be very strict, again, very, a real disciplinarian. So he was a headmaster par excellence as well, really pulling up the school and making sure everybody was, being their best selves.
Yeah. Okay, so again, yeah, Chinenye.
No, I think yes. So she said that captured it appropriately. So, what was the level of education then? Did they have universities? If you recall, the first university came in around 1960. So at that time, there were no universities. You finish secondary school and you're king. So that was it basically.
Great. Right. So again, at the age of 21, he's been a teacher for some years now, and he's been headmaster for a little while. Then he decides that we've already established he's a very pious person, he's hardworking, he's prayerful, and he has all the markings of somebody whose heart is seeking for God and seeking for deeper relationship and deeper spirituality. He loves to pray. He's just different from he's different from his peers, he's different from people of his age group, and he didn't quite associate or have the life that you normal people have, you know, because he was just bent a different way. But then at 21, he has a great job, he's earning good money, he's able to be proud to look after his family, being the last child too. That's a lot of accomplishment. But you know, I don't know how many older ones he had or what the age difference between him and the older ones were, but he's here at 21 doing well, seeming on the path of progress, bright shining lights in the, you know, something that anybody will be proud of. Then he makes this decision that he wants to go into the seminary and he wants to become a priest. That was interesting, and that had some, you know, let's just discuss how did his family take that decision, and what do you think propelled him? Because that's something that I asked myself, what would propel him against the arguments, in the face of the arguments against him entering the seminary?
His mum in particular took it quite badly, including going to the church and saying they should give her back her son. So she took it badly, and it's a reminder of the tensions that we often face, especially with first generation educated people, where there's a tension between being the financial provider and following what you believe is either your vocation or your calling or whatever it is. It's like, it's almost like your parents, you know, when they talk about, oh, you must be doctor, lawyer, engineer, etc. Because it's almost like we haven't spent all this money and time for you to go and tell us that you're an artist or you're, you know what I mean? It's almost like it behoves you to be able to come back and provide. And that was a really, really big issue. And why he might have done it, the only thing I can think of is where he felt that it's like the pull was in towards seminary was clearly greater than the family pull. And one can only think that he just felt so pulled by God that this is his calling. And he had to place what the Lord had ministered to his heart over what his mom desired.
Thank you for that. And just, there were consequences for that decision that he made and for that pull, whatever was pulling him in that way. And it was a high price in, you know, I guess in anybody's view, there was a high price that came with that decision. Chinenye, would you like to just discuss a bit?
So yes, as Shirley said, it was an issue for the family, being that he was the educated one, he was like the breadwinner, and he was leaving home. And what we saw happen was that around that time, there was this pandemic that swept around the land and people were dying. And as was the custom then, so they usually blame the old women, the old men, the widows, that they're the witches, they're the ones causing all that. And they, you know, when this happened, Tansi was not around, he was in the seminary, and they rounded up some people, because what they do is that when something bad happens in the village, they get these old women, maybe torture them, sometimes they kill them to appease or free themselves from whatever ailment has befallen the society. So this time around, they rounded up some old women, and unfortunately, Tansi's mom was one of them. So she was killed, and when he heard about this, he was really sad. But it was also noted that the people who were targeted were vulnerable people, just like we have in our present day society. If you're wealthy, if you're rich, if you have connections, if you're there, you know, people are not going to really mess around with you. So if Tansi was around, especially as an educated person, you know, and someone who was, you know, earning financially stable, it's with the chances are that those people will not have touched the mom. So I guess it's something that must have really hurt him a lot. But I believe that consolation would be that he followed the calling of God, and we'll see that in his life. So if he had stayed back, probably would not have known about Tansi today.
That's a great way to put it. If he had stayed back, yes, his mom would most likely have lived because they wouldn't have done that, or he would have been on hand to defend her. But also, most likely we wouldn't have heard about. I don't know. It's a hard place to be, like, you know, like I can't imagine the choice I would make. I mean, it's not like he knew that his mother was going to be affected this way, but I don't know. That's a big cross to bear. But there was something else I wanted to add about it. I don't know how the seminary works, and you, Chinaya, you might be able to give us some understanding, because one of the questions I asked myself reading it is, why did it need to be so, what's the word, exclusive? You went into the seminary and nobody heard from you and nobody can reach you. You're not, why did they need to be so separated? Was that the practice then, or is that still happening today? Because I wondered if it was possible that if he was reachable, they would have reached him and he would have been able to intervene.
We also have to consider the time, no technology, how the information, how was it passed, and how was communication. Even as recent as probably when I was young, people sent letters and it takes 3 or 4 days. And in our parents' time, I hear it takes weeks for you to even get a letter. So it's not the practice now. You have seminarians have phones and all that. You might not be allowed to use it when in school, but if there's an issue, your housemaster can, you know, let you know about it. So I think that was more a function of the times that they lived, and the fact that the place where the seminary was a distance from his home.
Okay. Thank you for that. So that's what came across to me, that it was, I don't know, you're not allowed contact with the outside world again once you get in from is it the 6 or 12 years that you spend in, you know, you're basically just in there. Your life revolves around your mates, your colleagues, and you don't get to interact. And I thought that's a bit burdensome, speaking from 21st century person with a lot of freedom in our world. And also, one of the things I wondered about is this maybe the way that, you know, Europeans did it? We in Africa, we're very communal people. We live in community. We live in responsibility to members of our family. So I thought about it that if this was designed by an African, I don't think it would ever have gone that way, because we're not an island. We don't practice islandism, if there's any such word. But I'm grateful that there has been changes. There's been evolution in that, and you don't need to be so far away and so far so cut off from life and from reality in order to attain those goals. So now he's a priest. Jumping forward, he's a priest now, and I'm not quite sure, how does it work? You're a priest and then you get posted to different parishes to lead that, much like maybe missionary pastors or evangelical pastors. Chinaya, would you like to explain how that works and how that also played out for?
Okay, so what happens is that you're posted to a parish, and most times, once you're ordained, you don't start off as a parish priest. You start out as an assistant or sub assistant, so that you get a better training over the years. And the structure of the church is that you cannot be given a parish for life. You will be moved from place to place. And I think part of it is to so that the priest can live in accordance with their true calling, which is, chastity, poverty, and obedience. These are the three things. So you have to be obedient to the Holy See, that's the Pope, the Church. And how do you practice that? You know, they instruct you to move. You know, that's part of it. And also that's detachment from the things of the world or materialism. Because if you stay in a particular parish, people get to love you, they get to know you, they give you things. You might start making some decisions or acting in a certain way that goes contrary to your teachings because of comfort over time. So by the time the push you, or when you have the back of your mind that you're not going to be here forever, you don't allow yourself, you know, get snared by some of these things and the politics. So that's really the reasoning behind it. You're moved from place to place, all true. That's just the structure of the church. And so for him, the same thing. He came out. He was assigned to a parish, and thereafter moved to another parish. Eventually became the parish priest of that church.
Okay, so it's an echo coming from somewhere. Yeah. So I hear what you say, and you know, but we're told that, you know, his approach to accepting, he accepted all of his postings and reposting, but you know, the author alludes to the fact that he felt slighted by some of them. He felt like, you know, I don't know, the decision making may not have come from a very good place, and it wasn't very thoughtful in their approach, especially because sometimes he's hardly set up roots, and then he's uprooted and thrown to somewhere else. And it seemed like there's very little consideration for his person. Is that supposed to be what comes with the territory of?
No, the underlying factor is detachment. So even if you have done everything from scratch and you're just about to see it blossom, they can take you away, and that teaches you detachment. You're not supposed to be attached to the things, because those things are really like material things. If it's not a material calling up, if they say you should leave, you leave. The most important thing is that you have propagated the faith, you've helped people, you're looking forward to helping the next person. And you know, when people write books, sometimes some of these things will be their own understanding. I would not say, because I was not there, but I doubt that from what we have read about Tansi, that it was really an issue, you know, for him. I recall that in one instance, he even left in the middle of the night so that the parishioners will not come and, you know, do a send forth and all that. That even shows that he was practicing that real detachment.
So yeah, what do you have to say about this?
I find it interesting that detachment, you know, I can see the importance of being detached from material things, but it seems like there was an expectation of them being relationally detached as well, which I find interesting, and I'm trying to dovetail it with the scriptures that talk about unity and us loving our brothers as ourselves, you know, which seems to be, you know, koinonia, this kind of relationship where we're in each other's lives. So it's but again, I don't have the benefit of understanding some of the principles behind the faith to be able to speak credibly about it, but it's just noteworthy for me.
Thank you for that. I actually asked you, knowing your background in looking for a general word, emotional healing, human relationship with God, human connection with God, and wholeness. So that's why I pointed that at you, because that's what I looked at and I struggled with, and you rightly pointed it out, that there is detachment from worldly things, but there's also that detachment from human relationship. And we can't to what extent can we really do life effectively, wholesomely, without building strong connections with people around us? And that is, in essence, the way that some of our greatest evangelical work is done, through the relationships we build. But I see that today that's quite different, because from my work, I had to connect with the Reverend Father, a very phenomenal Reverend Father. It's actually Reverend Father Michael, interestingly, in the church in Yaba, on Yaba Parish. I forget the name of his diocese. He's a very interesting philanthropist man, and he has experience being moved around, but he's had the benefit of staying in places a little bit longer and building relationship, building and building support systems that follow him about. So I wondered about that, but it seemed quite suited to him because he seemed to just align with that kind of life, of just detached from everything. Why I say this is because he would make a decision to go into the monastery, and that just sort of blew my mind. Like, why would anybody want to do that? I see monks on telly when I watch a movie, and what I see about them, they're hardly wearing clothes. They have something wrapped around, yes, usually white, plain color. They don't do multicolors, you know, wrapped around, and they're shaven, and they, you know, have their hands clasped, and they go about humming in the monastery. Everybody, you go in there and you're, I don't really know what they do. I don't know what value they add to society. And this isn't a criticism. This is me saying, this is the extent of what I know or what I've been exposed. I've jumped ahead, but coming back. So we know that Father Michael Iweni was posted around a few places, and he showed the people, the communities that he worked with, how to live very simple lives and how to make something worthy of their simple lives. You know, sometimes we make something worthy with much, but he, I guess, being from the seminary and being somebody whose work and life has taken a vow of poverty, is learned to do with the barest minimum. And also what I see in the story is that in the communities that he worked with, he taught people how to, these are poor villagers, they didn't have so much. He taught them how to make something of what he had. He taught them how to build, is it mud houses? I don't know what they built with before, but he taught them how to make mud, use mud to build their homes. We have an interesting story of, I think he set up, Chinaya, can you explain this? Because you'll have a better understanding. He set up this Sisters St. Anne's something group in the Roman Catholic in the church, and what was the purpose of that? And he had this interesting story of him kidnapping women.
Yeah, so married woman.
I was just like, yo, that is a bit too much. How do you take a woman that is married, even if she were single, okay, without consent, because you want to? Could you just tell us a bit more about that?
Okay, what I want to say about this part is that what we will see from Tansi and Omotunde is that, you know, they had their flaws, like each and every one of us. And it's interesting to see that God uses imperfect vessels to, you know, achieve his work. Some of these things, he might have done them and it looked good, but today, if you do that, that's a lockout facing you right there, you know. So yes, you could have people, or he could have been very zealous. So the thing is that he established this society to help women with, you know, chastity, ensuring that they're pure, they keep themselves till marriage. And, you know, the writer says that there was a time he even got girls together to make a covenant to be virgins before till they got married. Doing such a thing now is not, you know, required or really seen as the right thing to do. But you know that there's always evolution over time. And at a particular point in time, you might have a revelation which is different years or centuries down the line. Because God is infinite, we cannot know all paths to him. So he did a very good job with those societies because he was trying to teach them purity. There was even empowerment. So those ladies, those married ladies, he was trying to, you know, ensure that they have something that they can do with their hands so that they could earn for the society and for themselves. And it was even stated that these women and their husbands came to appreciate it a lot later. But by that time, I think he had left the parish. but that was it basically. Him trying to do right, to help women be better versions of themselves, and also spiritual persons.
Okay, thank you for that. I've just gotten a message that there's a question DB would like us to address, so I'm going to scroll up. The question is, the context of his time, what was the state of the church? Was Christianity established in that region at the time? Shola, do you mind unmuting and just clarifying that question to know where you're coming from? Tolu, can we give unmute Shola?
Thank you, Tolu, and thanks, Roberta. I had asked the question when you were talking about the context, and I wasn't sure if I missed it, because you had talked about the colonialism, slavery, and things like that, but I just wasn't sure how well established Christianity was vis-a-vis idolatry. You know, it's not new, so there was a seminary, so people were familiar with Christianity. Just to even understand why his family would resent him going into the seminary or not. Was it familiar? Was it still strange? And then I had a comment on the conversation you were having around what it takes for somebody to walk away from community and so on and so forth. And I was saying that, are we assuming that he's walking away from community because he left his people? Are you assuming that in the seminary there wasn't community and fellowship? Was he just exchanging one for the other? So it was just more, I mean, I don't know how much is in the actual text to help us think through this, but I think that there's something about a person, and I was just I was listening with the person that I'm here with, and we're saying how people can leave everything they know because there's something about the people around them who are operating in a different mindset that they just want to walk away from. It's not personal. It's not like they're walking away from the person. They're walking away from a value system and want to walk alongside people who share the same value system. Mother Teresa came from a wealthy family, left her family to go into, and you never hear of her family again. And she did so many amazing things, but she was never isolated or without community, operated in a space that was very communal in India. So it's not so much that you walk away from everything you know, but again, just to clarify what it is that you and the other speakers are talking about or trying to tease out in reviewing this man's life story and his journey.
Okay, thank you for that great question and comments. I appreciate it. So Nadia, this feels like your call. It has your name all over it.
I'll take the second one first. Thanks for that, Shola, and completely hear what you're saying about some having the need to leave. Can you still hear me? Says my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me okay? Okay. That sometimes people need to leave a certain community to go to another. But in this case, in Father Tansi's case, he went to a silent monastery where they didn't actually commune with each other in that regard. When they needed to communicate with each other, they just wrote. Can you still hear me? Okay. We just looked, so they just wrote to each other. And I'd be the first, I actually spent a weekend at a silent monastery, as one would, for a retreat, which was most interesting. And I did that because I wanted to retreat. And the only person I really wanted to commune with was with God. And so it's something as basic as even during meal times, everybody has a book. You know, you have your book stand, you come with your book, you read your book, and you don't fellowship with each other. So I guess and which is why I guess Robbie was talking about how perplexing it is, because he did choose to step away from communing with people into going into the monastery where it's just him and God for the most part. And I guess when they needed to, just exchanging written messages with others. To your first question, at that time, Christianity was very much in the early stages. If you remember, we were saying that the Roman Catholic Church and the Anglican Church were still trying to press forward in those areas. So it was very much early stages, and the church trying to gain ground in that part of the world, this part of the world.
Shola, do you have a further question? I see your hand up. Tolu, can we unmute her? I think she has something further to add.
Thank you. So thanks for explaining the context of the church at the time, because it's just helpful to also, again, just from listening to past people, if the church is very new, it's all about getting rid of the idols. But when a church is a bit more established, it's always fascinating to understand the relationship between our own people, that'll be the Nigerians, and then the church. Again, I guess the only thing I wanted to add, and it's more of a comment, I guess it's a closing comment to this discussion about community and people. Again, I don't know the details of Tansi and his relationship with his family or his perception of things around then, but I do feel like there's never a good and convenient time to just leave everything and go and spend time with God. It might seem like there's some times that are better than others, but sometimes it's really just not a convenient time. And sometimes I don't imagine, again, we can't tell, he's not here for us to ask, that he was going into a silent monastery for the rest of his life. But sometimes God does call people to be with him for a season, whatever that may be. And it's not an eschewing of community. I think that's, for me, it's like, it's not to say that there was a rejection of community. It may just not have been the best time. And it's not that God didn't know stuff was going to happen with his family. But maybe there was just something more to that we don't see, especially given the role that he plays in being one of our, one of the people that we inherited. Yes. Okay, so that's my final comment. I'll be quiet now and allow you guys to.
No, that's very insightful, and yes, that's very insightful, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the contribution. So I want to just move us forward now and situate him in the monastery. So at some point he makes the decision. After a few years, I think I forget how many years. After some years, about 12 years of being a priest and serving in different communities, he was still quite unsatisfied. There was something that just didn't feel like he had found what he was looking for, even though he had spent his time and his life serving and doing what he was asked to do. Just that was his way of serving God. He was so committed to, what do I need to do and how do I need to, just live this life that is totally sold out and called out to God and has very little to do with the things of this world. That's the way that I see him. He wanted to not have to be entangled, like many of us are, with things of our today, with the distractions. And this is what would propel him to want to go to the monastery. And as we come to understand it, I don't think anybody in Nigeria, and I don't know about Africa, had ever followed that path. He was to be the very first, to the best of my understanding, would follow that path. Even his superiors were a bit, they took time to consider this, because after he made his intentions known, they let it sit for a few years before they came back to him to say, yeah, it's like doing a review with your boss at work or with your mentor to say, how are we on this? Where are we on this? Are you feeling this thing you complained about? Is it been resolved? And many years later, he still expressed the same sort of, says even more so than he wants to go into the monastery. And I don't know if we'll have any here in Nigeria. I don't know if there's any in Africa. I actually don't know. And so that's how they went about looking for, and he was eventually taken, was it in Leicestershire, a monastery there. I like to refer Chineye, or ask Chineye to answer this, because Chineye is actually a Roman Catholic person. So she brings with her some better understanding of the inner workings for those of us that are very lay people and say silly things like, monks fold their arms and they hum about the entire place. This is also my opportunity to learn. But before I ask Chineye to explain what happened with him when he went into the monastery, I would like Sonyade to talk about his going into the monastery and the first few experiences and what we do, the information that we are provided with. Sonyade.
Thanks, Ravi. So I think, as you said, initially, his superiors they questioned the wisdom of whether or not this was something that he really wanted to do and was suitable for him. So it took a little while for them to come back to him in the affirmative. And once he went, of course, it took a bit of settling into, because obviously there was the climate change, etc. But I guess given the sort of person he was, he ended up just getting on with it.
Thank you. And yes, so before you go on, what was his initial experience in the monastery? Like, there were some experiences that I would like for you to just, like, what the food was, the dressing. It's like he went abroad for the first time. He went from a warm climate into a very different climate. What are we told, and what are your own thoughts of even what would have happened, knowing that you've experienced a bit more.
I think, Robin, I will not be pulled into this. I think Chineye is best respond, because on the face of it, it seems like suffer head, so to speak, in that they went, bathing was not a too frequent an event. But having said that, people who went to boarding school at that time equally, there were bath days. Well, not even in our generation. I know people who went to boarding school and there were bath days a few days a week, which is obviously better than, I think his was once a week or something like that. And then also food was very, very basic, and not basic and not in abundance. It was very much ascetic lifestyle, and they were just keeping it, very basic. But again, I'm sure Chineye will be able to shed more light.
Yeah, we'll leave that to Chineye. And on food, do you know, the thought that crossed my mind is, here's an African man in his hometown in the East, eating, I don't know what he ate, maybe that same roasted yam and some palm oil or some other thing. And he transitions to a very different society, different climate. There is no semblance of what you're used to. There is, give me bare necessity, give me yam without, or yam and palm oil is very basic, maybe yam and water. I don't know what, at least I know I can reckon with, I understand. Give me, maybe, I don't know, what's the basic soup that people have without all the frills, no meat, no fish, none of all of that fancy stuff that makes it complete. But he goes and he's drinking soups that he's never heard. I'm sure that was his very first encounter. I just thought the shock of it, because I remember as a teenager moving to the UK, I had many shock experiences. That immersion, it wasn't quite, culture shock, that's it. Culture shock on so many different levels. And even today as a grown person, making that, anytime I go on holiday, at least I know that there are certain things I understand I can eat, and there are things that, so I try to put myself in the person's shoes, and what would that have been for him? Like, what would make you put yourself through this? And what was your conviction? There's no note of complaint or discomfort with the food. He just seemed to embrace it. This is my life now. This is it. We're going to drink leek soup, and it's not going to have salt, or, you know, maybe once a week we might have some bread to dip into it. I just found that, like, Lord Jesus, if I can serve you like this, ha,
Can
oh
I
my
say a
God.
couple of things? First of all, you've got to remember who this man was. This is a man who, in one of his earlier postings, had slept in a very basic hut. And when he was being called from one posting to the other, Chineye mentioned it, he would just basically packed his possessions in one small case and left in the middle of the night. So that already gives you a sense of the man. But I'm going to read a couple of lines here, which I think is really what you're speaking about. It said, life as a monk was pretty lonely, dreary, but not unexciting. Depends on how you term exciting. It was a life of self-denial and mortification. So remember, that was the whole point of life of a monk, was that self-denial and death to self, death to self, death to self. Everything was regulated and censored like a military academy, with the noble exception that love reigned. So that's Shola's point. So it might have been love, but silent love. You get what I'm saying? You can't go to bed until the required time, and you must be awake by 2 a.m. when activities began. You can't even take a stroll or walk around the vicinity. Feeding was another area where denial was practiced with regularity. So it wasn't a chance. It was all part of the
experience, the lifestyle.
But what I'm hearing, Roberta, is that you don't believe that this is something that the Lord would be calling you to. Am I catching?
No.
Or were he to call you to this, maybe a call that you will, I don't want to say
not be
answer,
calling
but
me.
you will struggle.
He would not be calling me to that measure of extreme. That was extreme. That was extreme. It has to be a life for people who, they must have been ordained on, you know, I had a conversation with somebody. Actually, I was listening to something somebody posted the other day, and they said, you know, she has a theory that before we all came into earth, because we were in heaven first, you know, God said, I need my people to go and do this and do that and do that. And we all chose our calling. We chose. Somebody said, you know what, I'll choose poverty. I will battle with poverty and I will overcome. Somebody else said, I will battle with singleness and I will overcome. What that overcoming looks like, I don't really know, because it looks different.
That we then come to earth and completely forget that we've made those
choices. Just come to earth and somebody's like that. What? My God cannot let me. So perhaps I have missed my calling. You know, I told him I'm going to come to earth and embrace a life of poverty and, you know, denial. And I got to earth and I was like, nah, I've done. Nope, not possible. Can't. But yeah, just digression there. So Chineye, could you tell us about the monastery? What does it, how much of it do you know? What do you understand? What is the purpose that it serves? How does it add value how does it add value to the body of Christ? Because everything we're talking about is the contribution that people have made to the body of Christ. What is that value, and what was Father Tansi's ultimate pursuit? Did he achieve his ultimate pursuit? So I'm just putting so many questions in one because I want you to give us a good idea of, you know, his experience there and how we're, just help us to segue into a closeout.
Okay. So my understanding, first of all, regarding the calling to a contemplative life, because that's what you call those who become monks and nuns, is that there's a calling. I don't think that in most of these cases, they just decide to go and become a monk. As we see in respect of Tansi, he was a priest. He was doing, you know, relatively well. He had society. He was helping women. He was helping widows, the poor. He was engaging with people and helping them out. And yet, he still felt a void. And the bishop then, Bishop Wellam, told him, go and think about this. why are you saying you're called to a higher calling? And he went back and came back and still insisted that he wants to be a monk. So I think that God has placed it in certain people, that kind of hunger. And for some, once they're able to be priests and help others, that's the fulfillment. For some, God wants them in that monastic life. And the void is going to be there until it's filled. And we hear, or we read that when Tansi now went into the abbey, he said that his heart is filled, he has found fulfillment. And that is the Holy Spirit, speaking and revealing that this is what he wanted of him. And he has, as I said earlier, he has experienced the life of engaging with people, and he still wanted the monastic life. So I believe that that was calling from God. And we can see later on that with his life, he was able to touch a lot of people, and even in death, a lot of miracles, came true because of him. And now regarding the monastery, so I guess in the early times, as we have said, the Holy Spirit will say, okay, I want you to just move away from people and just dedicate your life to prayer. It's even in the Bible, pray without ceasing. So for some people, they pray by engaging in everyday life. You're walking, you're doing this Zoom, and you're trying to do it as well as you can. That is a form of prayer. Why some people just want to do the whole praying from morning to night. And so when this call was put in the hearts of some people and they started this, they went to the Pope and said, we want a congregation to be formed. And they began this congregation of monks. So that is how it started. And we have different congregations. We have the Dominicans, we have we have the Augustinians, we have the Carmelites. So they are just different congregations, and they have their own peculiar rules. But the main thing is that they're just the life of prayer and worship. And that for them takes precedence over economic or environmental engagement and all that with people, relationship with others. As I think Busola had said, there's a form of brotherhood that they experience with their fellow monks. So in some cases, they do not speak, they write, or they use sign language, but there's still that communion. I was privileged to go to a monastery so many years ago, a home monastery, and it was very nice being with them. And the fact is that they are not averse to the world, because that home monastery has people coming in from different parts of Nigeria, people coming in from different parts of the world. It's like a tourist attraction. And when we got there, you have your hostels, you stay there. When it's night time for the evening mass, you go in with the monks. So the monks just sit on their own end, you sit on your own end, But the fact is that when you're around, they try not to come out. You usually see them during time for prayers. And the time for prayers is very early, around 4 a.m. when it's dark, and you can't really see them. So, but the fact is that they opened up the abbey to people. And in Nigeria, we have, I think they say around 4 or 5 monasteries. We have one in Lagos, that is the one at Shongo Tedo. We have the Ohum Monastery in Enugu. There's one in Jos. There's one in Ozubulu. So we have like 5 of them. And the Ohum one has the position of an abbey, which is higher, than the normal monastery. But to wrap up this, I just want to say that I believe God has called people to this kind of life. They are interceding for us, they are praying for us, and it's appreciated. At least we, the Roman Catholics, we really appreciate the position they play as intercessors.
And when you think about it, the sacrifice they are making, they are sacrificing, living, choosing to live their lives in one way so you can live your lives in another.
That's another way of saying it. I think she's not here anymore.
I lost my power. She might have lost her power, her electricity as well.
Okay.
Yes, I lost my power, but I was trying to unmute a second device. So
Okay.
it's dark here, so I can put on the camera.
Okay.
All right, thank you for that, Chineye. And just to round up, the crowning of this is that, 1990, I think it's 1998, there was a beatification ceremony for him where he attained the status of a saint. And what is that? What does that mean to attain that status of a saint? What led to him attaining that?
Okay, so he's not a saint yet. I think the right I won't say he's a saint. I think that's a mixed up on his part. He's blessed. So before you can become a saint in the Catholic Church, you have to first be blessed, canonized as blessed, and then after that, you become a saint. So it's the first stage that has been passed. And what happened was that, so yes, he lived a good life. He was very pious. He was an inspiration to the other monks. And at the end of his life, he caught a cold. And when he caught a cold, he was taken to the hospital. And they said he smiled all through. He was positive all through, and that inspired the other monks. And even though, because he was in pain, they said, the doctor said, how can you be in so much pain? From what I've examined, you're in so much pain, and yet you're saying it's little pain. So that just shows the life of sacrifice that he tried to live and mortification. So they said when he died, that his face was rested like he was in peace, and people could see that. And he was buried in the UK. But what happened was that 20 years after, he was exhumed and brought back to Nigeria. When he was brought back to Nigeria, this was in 1986, and he was buried at the Holy Trinity Church in Onitsha, at the place where they buried the priest. So he was buried there. But the fact is that when they brought him, people had been hearing about his life, what he has been doing. And what usually happens is that if a very pious person had lived a life of almost perfection and really tried, so there's this grace that God has given you. And in death, Catholics believe that they can call on those people to intercede for them in prayer. So they say you're praying for something, say, oh, when it Tansi, intercede for me. And then what they notice is that in asking for intercession, that these things were being granted. So miracles were, happening. And so when he came back, there was this thing that happened of a woman who had cancer for a very long time. And she placed her hand on the casket and she was healed. So that was, because I spoke with someone in the society that belongs to the Tansi society. So what happens is that when you have saints, we have what is called societies, where they come once in a while to say prayers and ask the saints to intercede for them and all that. So I know someone who is a very serious member of this society, and I spoke to her, and she said even at that point in time, that a lot of miracles were happening. And so when this woman placed her hand on the casket and she was healed, it was one of the pivotal miracles that was sent to Rome. And the church is very particular about investigating. They are very, very particular about investigating miracles. So when they were able to establish that, they now said that there was need to listen and hear from more people. So what happens is that other Catholics or other people who have interceded, asked for intercession, were now sending reports of miracles to Rome. And when Rome was able to ascertain a high number of them, I don't think it's easy to ascertain all of them. So a high number of them, then they now call for the purification of the person. And in bringing out his body, they found out that his shoes did not decay. They said his face if you look at his face, if you look at his body, it didn't decompose. And, you know, I even believe that in recent days, that in recent times, that a lot of people are saints, and that if you actually go and get out their corpse, you see that it has not decomposed, but it's just that because people are not used to that. But the Roman Catholics used to do that a lot. When they feel someone is a saint, they go and check, and they find out that this person did not decompose. So we still have such bodies, Padre Pio, all of them, they are there. These people are not embalmed. So it's a miracle that God has, you know, made happen in their deaths, and as a sign for people to see. So that's how he was now beautified. And calls, when I spoke with this lady, she said that people have been sending reports, but I think they have stopped collecting reports for now. So the next stage is that, I guess, by the time the church ascertains most of them, it will now call for him to be made a saint of the church. And then this might sound strange to some people.
Thank you. Very informative. Very informative. Robbie, you're muted.
Yes, I realize that. Sorry. Tolu, can you make me co-host? Sorry.
The only thing is, I'm now wondering if when I die, whether my body will decompose. God, my body should not decompose.
I think for St. Anthony, his body decomposed, but his tongue did not decompose. And the tongue is the first part of the body that decomposes. But to show you how saintly he was, his tongue did not decompose.
These are all
Yeah,
rather interesting.
Yeah.
Rather interesting. Thank you for that, Chineye. We're well past the time, and I want to jump. So that's the story of Father Michael Tansi Iweni. He was a simple man. He didn't work any miracles. He didn't didn't give any prophetic words. He, you know, didn't work any signs, heal the sick or anything like that. But it was just by the act of his life, the simplicity of his life, his commitments and dedication to just pursuing after God. Something greater was calling him, and he didn't care about the fame or being known. He didn't care about being known, or he just didn't seem to care about much, but pursuing and going quite further and further and deeper into God. I understand he wasn't very well known even around this time. He's not as known as, he wasn't as known during his time as some of the other people that we've looked at, but many years later, his life, his legacy lived on, and his legacy was simply how he conducted his life, his yearning for God, his dedication and his pursuits. He had so little and he made so much out of the very little that he had, and he lived. The only other person I can think of is Simon. Is it Simon Kibangu? No. Not Simon. Simon was from the Congo. I'm trying to think of the guy from the Buganda kingdom. I forget his name. I see it. Kivier something. I see it. He was another person who lived a very simple life, no miracles, didn't see any signs, didn't do nothing extraordinary, but his character was what converted so many people, so many of the pygmies to faith in Jesus Christ. And I truly celebrate that. And now we jump into...
Just before you do, can I quickly say one thing in response to what Shola has just put? I think what struck me about Father Tansi is that his greatness was not in his doing, but in his being. And in this, you know, where everything is about doing, it's just really instructive to see somebody, his power being based on who he was rather than what he did.
Yeah, that's very powerful.
Okay.
That's very powerful.
For me, the impact was his holy life, the fact that he died to himself every day to be a good person, to walk in the light of God, and also believing in his convictions, following the Holy Spirit, because sometimes we hear and we just move away. So, but the fact that he followed the Holy Spirit despite the circumstances at that time is admirable and something that I pray for.
Thank you for that, Chinaya. And yes, that just living such a life that is completely and totally after God and not looking for any accolades. It's something that's quite difficult for us today because we want the recognition. We want the recognition. We want to see some outputs for the work that we do. And sometimes we want to see some output. And when we don't see an output, we shrink back and we think that we have failed in life. Not so. It provides a model for us to emulate. Okay, thank you for that rich conversation. Now we go into looking at Emmanuel Omotunde, Omotunde, the great evangelist and healer that was in Nigeria at some point. As I always say, that the information we have about these people we're talking about is we have little information and we try to just decipher what's going on with the information that we have. So what we do know, by way of overview about Emmanuel Omotunde, that he was from Aramoko in Ekiti. So he's from Ekiti. If you're from Ekiti, this is your Kingsman. His birth is placed around, we're unsure, the author is unsure, between 1864 and maybe 1874. I would put it around a 10-year gap. So he was older than all the people that most of the people that we've looked at. Actually, he was older than all of them. His mother was the wife of, this is quite interesting, his mother was the last wife of his grandfather. So his mother was married to his grandfather. Upon his grandfather's death, according to tradition, the youngest wife of the man is given to the oldest son. So his mother was then given to his father to marry. So his mother was his father's stepmother. You get the drift. That was a tradition. So we are told that he was conscious of his birth. You know, as a baby, those moments when you're coming out, none of us remembers it. None of us knows what really goes on, except you've been a mom, you're a mom, or you're a midwife, then you know exactly what's going on there. But not so for this for this person. Not only is he not a mom and he's not a midwife, he's male. He says he knows what happened when he was being brought into this world. He remembers being ushered into the world by angels and he saw bright lights. And shortly after they escorted him out of the womb into the world, he lost that connection. He lost the connection with the other world after his placenta was cut. We've had some spooky stories here. We've had somebody who walked on the day of his birth, and that's how he got crippled because the midwives were so shocked. You've just come out of the womb. Babies, newborn, a few minutes old babies don't walk. And he was trying to walk and they tried to keep him down and he ended up partially crippled on his leg. We've had that. We've also had someone who spoke. I think it's the same person who spoke from his mother's womb. So we've heard it all. We've heard it all. This one of him being aware of Emmanuel Omotunde being aware of his birth doesn't surprise me too much. It's in keeping with the general flow of these special characters we're looking at. So his story was validated, of the events as he recalls them when he was born were validated by the midwives some years later, I think, when maybe there was a trading of stories. So being born in the late 19th century, he had no formal education. He had no education as a child, actually. Well, no, I correct myself. No formal education. He wasn't literate as a child, but eventually he learned to read and write from mission churches as part of his conversion necessity to the church. And if you've been following the review, you know that way back then, to become part of the church, you had to learn to read, because the Christians were called readers because they were always reading the Bible, a book, a creed, pamphlets. They were reading something. That's when he learned to read. But this was much later in his adult life. He had already started, he was an adult, he was in his 20s at this time. Vocation-wise, he appears to be a jack of all trades. He was a farmer. He was a farmer. He also was a trader because he bought and sold cocoa and coffee and cola nut. He was an artisan because he made embroidery specifically for the king's crown. He was a builder and a bricklayer. This man was gifted. He was a jack of many trades. So it was speculated that he joined the CMS Church, that's the Church Missionary Society. Those are the first churches that were, evangelized Africa, evangelized Nigeria around 1910, 1915. He married his first wife in the early 1920s. This was after he had joined the church. And he had his first child in 1928. Then in 1930, he got a job, a building project in Ife. This was his introduction to this is where he encountered the cherubim and seraphim, because when he had got introduced to the church in his community, it was the CMS church, as we had noted, and he had learned to read, and he went to church and did all the church observance. But moving to Ife to take on this project, this building project, there was CNS already established there long before, shortly before him. And so he joined the community and started to, one of the things we know about CNS and most churches at the time, they prayed, which is what the Anglican Church and the Catholic, the Church Missionary Society did not have. So here, what they did was pray. So we're told of Pa Josiah Akindayomi. If you're familiar with the Redeemed Christian Church of God, he's the founder of the Redeemed Christian Church of God, joined CNS, the same group, a year after Omotunde had joined it. So they would have crossed paths. These are somewhat contemporaries. Then while in CNS, Omotunde married his second wife. So he married his first wife. Then he, as a Christian in the CMS, and now in CNS, he marries his second wife. At that time, a lot of our churches, they didn't have a strong position on polygamy. It was still something debated. Some people accepted it. Some people made excuses for it. Some people were outright, no, this is unscriptural. This is not accepted. There was a lot of confusion. Some Christians really and truly didn't think anything was wrong with it. They believed that monogamy was for the white man. God didn't make that God had different rules for Black people, for Africans. So while he was in Ife, working, Joseph Babalola, that we've looked at last time, was in his hometown, had entered his hometown of Aramoko and had a revival meeting there, but they didn't get to meet. And after, I think one of the important things that happened was that a man that was dead in his village was brought back to life by Babalola's revival. And from there, a prayer group was established while Omotunde was still away. So in 1931, Omotunde comes back to his hometown, his community. He sees this thriving prayer group, already learned to pray from CNS Church, and he joins this prayer group. Shortly afterwards, the prayer group suffered some problems because we know that Babalola was imprisoned by the colonial administrators. They accused him of not witchcraft, but experimenting or testing out something to do with witchcraft. So he was imprisoned for a time. And of course, when you strike the sheep, the shepherd strike the shepherd and the sheep scatters, there was a lot of instability in the different groups that he had established. It was at this time that Omotunde had a vision of two angels that came to him and they anointed him with oil. He didn't have a clue of what that meant. And but he told his colleagues and they decided to pray about it. And after they prayed about it to understand what what this could be talking about, it led to the birth of a prayer meeting, a new prayer meeting now in his own house. So that's my way of introducing him, or giving us some kind of background of who he is and how he enters in. But going back now, I want to throw the question to my fellow panelists, discussants. What is your general overview when you read the story, when you read the story of the Emmanuel or Omotunde? What comes across to you? Where what are the important things or interesting things that comes across to you as you read the story with the information that's provided? Anybody can take a jump at it.
Okay, I'll go first. I think the first thing that struck me was the power with which he operated. The writer says that, given that the writer has written about all these African greats, right? And he's saying nobody has, operated under such spiritual power as Emmanuel Omotunde, that when he spoke, his prophetic words, it's almost like, not so much his prophetic words were saying what was going to happen. It was as if in speaking, it came to pass, be it good or bad. Such was the measure of power under which he operated. He's also a man of seeming contradictions, in that you spoke about polygamy, which certainly in the modern day African church might be, shall we say, a little confusing for us, but interesting. Let me leave Chineye to add to that.
Okay, so I would, continue from where you stopped, but also emphasize power. His power was peculiar. I remember there was a story about him. He had a crusade and he had to be called to Lagos. And I think that was Ekiti. And they said, oh, you're leaving. What are we going to do? He told them, don't worry, that when I'm in Lagos and you're here, come the next day, fill up your bottles with water, and then hold it up by 12 noon. And wherever I am, I'm going to pray. And whatever you want, miracles were found. And he did exactly that. So by 12 noon, they were all in the church. He prayed, they drank or they used their water, and then miracles were everywhere. So there are so many stories of all the miracles that, brought through him. And he had immense power. God gave him a lot of power. So that was very striking. They said he was also a humble person. Though he was authoritative, he was firm, but he was not arrogant, he was not proud. So, and he was a hard worker. Roberta already mentioned that he was bricklayer, he was builder, he was trading in cocoa. So he was very industrious. And I like that about him, because I feel that even as a man of God, a woman of God, you could, be doing other things to be financially independent. He was generous. He ate rarely. He gave his life to prayer and fasting. And I'll end with this. One thing that also struck me was the fact of the way he prayed or the way he healed. They said he rarely prayed during the crusade. And he was one of a few words that what he would say is, you're sanctified in Jesus' name, and that's it. You're healed. So that was very different. That struck me.
One word comes to mind, and that's capacity. I think that was mentioned as well. Yes. He had tremendous capacity.
Tremendous.
Thank you. Yes, the man had a lot of capacity. He had a lot of capacity. Now, I want to just go into the meat of it. So we've seen him come in how did he come into, what is the account of how he came into ministry? Because this is a man we've seen, he joins the church, he becomes a Christian, then he meets CNS and he learns to pray. Then he joins Babalola's prayer ministry and he prays some more. Then he starts his own prayer ministry at home and he prays some more. But how do we, what's transpired? What are the events that transpired to bring him? Why are we talking about him today? What are the events? What was the journey to, you know, to the man, Emmanuel Omotunde, and what was spectacular about him? And also, yeah, just what brought him to fame or to light, so to speak. Anybody wants to talk about that?
Oh, okay, if I can take part of that. So from what we read, it says that Babalola was arrested at a point, I think in 1932. And when he was arrested, you know, there was no leader for the CMS church. And it was at this point that Omotunde had a vision of angels anointing him. And I think he asked someone and the person said, oh, you're going to be a leader. And he prayed and he prayed. And, you know, from there, he started like a house fellowship. They used to meet once a week. He started with his family members. I think the first time they were 13. And then now had more and more people coming. Then thereafter, he had two friends who were also part of his prayer group. One of them is Joshua. And this Joshua had a vision, or it was a prophecy. So it was a prophecy. And there were two. He told him that you're going to go to Ilorin, you're going to go to Elisha, and things are going to happen there. And that will bring you to your true calling. So, and it didn't happen immediately. It was actually 2 years after Joshua told him that the first one happened. So he was now called to Zaria to do some building work. And he had to pass through Ilorin. You know, that was one of the places that was mentioned in the prophecy. And he stayed at the house of a wealthy man, and the wife had been ill for so many years. And, you know, he prayed and healed her. So when he did that, you know, it came to him that, okay, this is the prophecy that I was given, that I will do something mighty in Ilorin. And thereafter, on his way back from Zaria, he also healed another woman. Then the second prophecy, which had to do with Elisha, was that he also went there for a building job. And when he got there, you know, there was another miracle he performed. And when he performed that miracle, everyone just started coming. There were just so many people following him. There was a multitude, and it just started growing, you know. So up to the extent that even when he left Elisha and went back to his hometown, that is Ara Moko, this multitude of people followed him and settled with him. So it now became like a Christian settlement. And people from all over were now coming because there was so many miracles happening. And some of them came and were healed and they went back, while the others stayed and settled because that place was an arable land and we could farm. So that's how the community now started, and from there it just blossomed.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for introducing us to that and explaining that. Now, I want to talk about Babalola and Omotunde Omoni, Emmanuel Omotunde Omoni. The book gives us some information, but not so much. But there's an indication that these two men were called to align somewhat. And there was a measure of, there was some alignment between them. There were some things that were achieved when they were both aligned. Granted, Omoni was considerably older than Babalola and everyone else in that time because he was born the generation before. So he would have been at least 20 years or so, older than them. But I noticed that he respected, that was never really an issue, that he was called to serve or be under Babalola. Babalola was more grounded in doctrine than Omotunde was. In fact, it appears that he didn't have too much of a solid doctrine. And as to what Soyade said before, that his words were what he carried. His words were so powerful. It's like if he spoke them, it was just going to happen. He just had the grace or the anointing to pull things. By his speaking, he created them. By his speaking, he made that happen, whether good or bad. So I want us to just discuss a bit more about the relationship or the partnership that was for a bit, the potential it did have or didn't have to become something else, and why that didn't actually materialize. We didn't see it become what it could have. They didn't stay in partnership for too long. Soyade, would you like to discuss that?
So as you said, Babalola and Omotunde, they worked together for some time. And as you just mentioned, though Babalola was younger than Omotunde, it was noted that Omotunde would still refer to him as Oga. So they certainly had a good working relationship. And it was clear to both of them, it would appear, that God wanted them to work together. But there was one key area of doctrinal difference, and it was to do with the number of wives one man should have. And it'd be interesting to hear the men on the call today, what their views are. But when Omotunde started in ministry, he had 3 wives, and thereafter, poor man had 3 further wives given to him. You can imagine how traumatic that was for him. In fact, it was somebody, I think it's the writer, I keep referring to it as the writer, Mr. Idu. Mr. Idu, in his summary at the end, was just saying one of his key takeaways is that, powerful men, even men of God, shall we say in modern parlance, chick magnets. they attract women. So Omotunde attracted women, and Babalola was of the school of thought that it really ought to be one man, one wife. And this was something that they continued. Daniel, I'm not sure whether you're saying indeed it should be one man, one wife, or it is that powerful men are chick magnets. It would be great if you could clarify what your position is on this particular topic. So this was an issue that they really struggled with. At some point, they even went on a retreat to pray about it. But on a more serious note, I think, to preempt one of Shola's likely questions at the end, it was just a reminder that God really does use people where they were at. His own view is, I had many wives when God called me. So why are we insisting that I must only have one wife? And then the question that came to my mind is, if we believe that a man should only have one wife, but then we also believe that God does not like divorce, then which is the greatest sin? Should he have divorced his other 2 wives? How does the whole work? And again, it just goes back to, the complexities of so many of these issues. And I think we as mature Christians would do well not to try and simplify what are indeed, complex issues that we don't always have the full revelation of, how to tread through these at this time. And I'll pause there.
That was a beautiful, beautiful contribution, beautifully said, and complex too, because, as I read the story of this man with his 6 wives, you're just thinking, what what is going on? 6 wives? But, you know, the experience or what I have come to know, what I've known of the church is someone gets converted and they come with their, you know, troop of their harem of wives or whatever you call it. And the church will typically ask them to do away with all the other ones, you know, so the first wife usually triumphs. At this point, I take a pause and I celebrate with the first wife because we know first wife, you came in there first, but newer, fresher ones come in after you and you no longer have that spot, you know, as somebody who wouldn't want to be sharing anything. But I always wondered about that approach that, you know, you send off the other wives, they've had children, you've slept with them, you have, in every sense of the word, the definition of marriage, you are married to this person, and you've had children, then you send them away because it's complex. I don't have the answer, and I know that Sonyade doesn't have the answer, and that's why she presented her thoughts the way that she presented it. If you have the answer, if God has revealed to you what should be done in this situation, it would be great to know. It would be great to know. But this was the case of this man where he did go out because the church, when he was in collaboration with Babalola, the church that had been founded, CAC Church, fought against that because they just couldn't handle it. They really, and I understand their frustration. How can you be called of God and you have 6 wives, not one, not even, you have 6 wives. That's a bit greedy. Those are my thoughts, my words. It's a bit greedy. You know, how do you, anyway, back then they handled it well. They were able to live with so many wives, and they seem to be in very peaceful cohabitation amongst the wives. We're not told of any infightings or anything, you know, and his wives accompanied him. Another interesting thing, his wives accompanied him on his missions, on his trips, which is, you know, even super interesting because in the other people that we've looked at, marriage is consistently an area of problem with the men. Either they married the wrong woman, a woman was forced on them, something about marriage, and they only just had one. The women were not so aligned with their ministry. Here is a man with his 6 wives, and they went along with him, and I'm confused. It's a bit confusing, and it's like God has a lot to tell us. I think we'll be engaged in heavenly discourse, in some very interesting discourse when we eventually, you know, when we are done away with this side of eternity. I found that really quite interesting. Yeah.
Just to quickly add, I think part of why something like polygamy would have been such a thorny issue is, if you remember in the times of the early church, they were trying to really come against a lot of traditional practices, including the rituals and idolatry, etc. So polygamy would have, to their minds, just been one such ungodly practice.
Yeah. Yes. And
yes,
I actually want
to Daniel's point, it does seem like there was, you know, as a mathematician at heart, a direct proportion
correlation
and power that was exhibited. But again, my prayer for you and for my husband is that may the Lord not gift you with
with extra power.
Always.
We say a big amen to that. We say a big amen to that. Okay, so
I wanted to add to the reasons for the rift between Babalola and Omotunde. So what Shande has said, it's part of it, the issue of polygamy. There were also other issues, but these were like different accounts by different people. So we had the CAC historian saying that Omotunde came one time and said he has had a message from God, and the message, I think there were like 4 of them. One of them was that they should pay tithes to the church, and also that he didn't want pastors, that God said he didn't want pastors in the church because they crucified Jesus, you know, some other things. And that was their own side of the story. And because of that, the elders of the church could not accept this and fell out with Omotunde. So that's how CAC and Omotunde went their own way, or Babalola and Omotunde. Another account by the ACC, the African Apostolic Church, is to the fact that there was a land given to them by one Mr. Elliot, who was a very wealthy man in Lagos, who was paralyzed and he was healed by by Omotunde, and he now gifted them a land in Obon Eko. Pardon my pronunciation of Yoruba words. So, but I think the CAC Church wanted it, and because of that, they parted ways. There was this issue. Yet another account, this one by one of the children of Omotunde, is that there were money issues, that the CAC Church was taking most of the money and giving little money to Omotunde and his people, like his representatives or people that were working with him. Meanwhile, he was doing a lot of the work, the miracles, revivals. And then fourthly, you had the issue of polygamy. It became such an issue that Babalola and Omotunde and some other people went to pray about it. And when they went to pray about it, what they were told was that God had revealed or told Omotunde before, when he had asked, that I called you into this thing. I do not really, what my calling of you to this ministry has nothing to do with marriage. And therefore, my answer still stands, or my position still stands. And for you to doubt it, coming again to ask about this particular issue, that one person amongst you will die. And then one person died 3 months after. So we hear that after that encounter, Omotunde and Babalola, were not together anymore. So it could be any of this or all of them together. Can't really tell.
I think my thoughts are that, we've established that, he was a man of many women, and that was a thorn in the flesh for the church. I can understand why that would be a thorn in the flesh for the church. And they needed to get him out. If you look at church politics or human politics, they just couldn't go on with this. They didn't understand why Babalola would. So they just looked he was just a thorn in the flesh. So there would be reasons would keep coming up for why he is wrong. He should be disqualified, he should be removed. They would always find fault. And they came up with this list of things that he was supposed to have said. When I look at it, I think it's possible that he did say those things. When you read the account, it sounds outrageous and it sounds rather pompous. But when you look at the life of the man, you would know that if he said this, it wasn't the way that it was reported. So things he said were taken and twisted for other purposes. And we see that play out in human lives. Somebody says you said this, and the way they say that you said that completely different and misses the intention that you were trying to communicate. So these two great men that God had called to work together fell apart. In fact, they're falling apart. Their falling apart was so bad that they became petty to each other. We're given an account of where if Babalola was having a revival in an area, Omotunde would try and get there the day before to have something, or have an alternative one in a nearby community. Or, they were just doing, just like little kids, just competing against each other, until God really had to slap them on the wrist and say, stop it. Would you just stop that nonsense right now? Would you grow up? And that's how they were able to mend that quarrel. But by then, so much had been done. They were no longer working together as ministry partners, although they continued to respect each other. We have a comment here by Adenike. Adenike says, I was quite interested in the prophecy about him selling coconut oil to meet his needs. Though there wasn't much discussion about this, it touched me that God is mindful of the details of our lives. Yes. Does any one of you want to comment on that, respond to that?
Yes, I think Chinelo was partly mentioning about the fact that he was not, he didn't collect tithes. He wasn't collecting money from the people. So he would go, as Erika said, because God had essentially made provision for him through commerce. So his livelihood was not based on ministry and takings from the ministry.
And God really did supply his needs. God supplied. That was an interesting, I've heard this story before somewhere that God told somebody to sell coconut oil, you know, but I never knew that this is the context in which that story came from. And so it was very nice. It was heartwarming and to read how it came about. God calls you and he provides for your every need. He equips you. You know, they taught us where God gives a vision, he makes provision for the vision. And there's no provision, but one of those rhyme and rhythm things can never quite work with them. But I know that our time is fast spent, and so I want to just jump in. One of the things that let me see before I say that. So we don't know too much about his personal life, but we know that because he had 6 wives, he had many children, very many children, and 30-something children. So how many were there? 30-something, and most of them died.
37.
37.
Only 7 survived.
We're told that he would typically, when he's gone out on his mission trips and he's coming back, it's almost as if he's coming back to the greetings of, oh, you've just lost another one. Yeah, that one didn't make it through. You know, that one. I wondered within myself, what would make a man keep going? Every time you go out on a mission, you come back, and the news of your greeting, your welcome back, you've done well, is that you've lost a child. You lose 30 children. I don't know how he kept strong. Was he not connected with them? With the children? Were they just like, I don't know, a number? How did he console his wives? How did that even affect his ministry? We're not really told much about that, and it's something that I would have loved to probe and know. How do the events that occur in your personal life affect your ministry? Because we're taking time to look at people who built the foundation of Christianity that we have today. How do they handle the struggles that we're handling today? He faced it. I don't know anybody living, I don't know, there might be, who's had 37 children and lost 30 of them. I know there are people who have had up to 30 children, but that they lost 30 of their children. What does that do to a person? What does that do to you, especially when you claim you're serving a superior power and you're doing all these miracles for people and you're raising the dead and you're casting out demons with simple prayer, 3 sentences or one sentence, short sentence, and you know, you never, DB says it's enough to demoralize any man. I don't know, demoralize just sounds like a play word compared to how I would feel. I would go into so much depression. I don't know, it would take a great intervention for me to ever recover from it. So I wanna jump into the end of his ministry. So we've established the things that were great about him. He was a strong seer, and he had a strong, what's the word? He had very strong anointing. Like his words were almost like he spoke them and they came into existence almost immediately. There was no second guessing, no long prayer. He was very fiery. And the book tells us that he was called to be a great companion. He would have been a great companion of Babalola, because while Babalola was more grounded and had theology, and Babalola had the grace to sustain, to do a work that could be sustained. He had the grace to bring them all in, you know. This is where partnership comes in. I think we've talked about it in our previous conversations, where we have to look at the people that God has called to partner with us, and we have to understand their strengths and work alongside with them. And in working alongside, we both, or all of us, all the parties, get the opportunity to grow and deepen, you know, just improve on those areas. This is something that they missed out on. And they had we know how Babalola died. He got a sense that his time was coming. And so because he had been stressed from working, this was one of the reasons why he died when he died. He had worked himself out because he didn't have the help that he thought he would have had. Daniel Orekoya had died in such a gruesome way. And so this man had worked so much and he didn't have the help in Omotunde that he should have had because of the friction that had occurred between them. And so he died out early, and Omotunde was to follow shortly after. So Soyande, I want to put this question to you. What would you say were the legacy of his life, and what would you say about his as we're closing out, what was his contribution to bearing in mind the limitation of this was what he was called to do, to partner with Babalola, but that didn't quite happen. To what extent was he able to fulfill the call or the mandate on his life? And what does he leave us with today, both good and not so good?
I think what immediately comes to mind is, something like hosting the presence, where we are talking about evangelism through the working of miracles. So the story starts with him being a particular village that had suffered from drought. And they called all the different people, including the native doctors, etc., etc. And nobody could bring rain to the land. And he came and he said by midnight or something, there'll be rain, and it rained. And so by operating and demonstrating the power of God that he did, he would have helped to really evangelize across the Southwest, because a lot of the stuff told it's across the Southwest that he operated, and would have showed the power of God and made God more real to those people. So himself, the likes of Babalola, were clearly the early foundations of the church in that part of Nigeria. As you said, he, like all of us, was not perfect. He's referred to as somebody who had a bit of a temper. And so given the power that his words had, it was not unheard of for him to sometimes speak out in anger, and for that negative word, aka a curse, to come to pass in the people's lives. But again, it's just a reminder to each one of us that just as we are, God can use us. He wasn't, a Bible basher. He didn't know that, remember he was, I like how they put it, it's like he was not a stark illiterate. He clearly was not a man of the letter, so that might have hindered his ability to really get into the depths of the word. But God used him as he desired. And it's an encouragement for every single one of us.
Thank you for that. Chinaya, would you like to add something?
Yes, I would. One of the things that I got from his story is the fact that, religious opinions sometimes are not always right. It was said that the churches of his time sort of, rejected him, probably because he was different. He had wives, he didn't collect tithes and offerings, he didn't wear collar, he didn't believe in very investment. So he was different. But the fact is that God still used him. The hand of God was with him. And so it also calls us to be patient and more understanding rather than judge people, because God works through people. Instead of just using that worldly view to look at someone and say, oh no, this thing is wrong, why don't we ask the Holy Spirit what he's saying about a particular person or situation? And also the issue of women, they pointed out that as a man of God, if you're very popular, the women will come. That has always been something that's been there even till this present time. So in recognizing that, we're called upon as men or women of God to be watchful, to guide and guard ourselves. And also to have faith in God and not people, because God told him, see, go and you're going to trade in coconut oil and sustain you, because people are not going to help you. And he believed God and followed him and found sustenance. So those are the things that struck me about his life.
Thank you. We have a nice comment from Shola here. It says, my thinking of these men who are unusual pioneer leaders is that God's thoughts are not our thoughts, and that perhaps we should look for God in unexpected packages. May we not be Pharisaic and be open to God's goodness in all forms. And I truly echo that, because as I say, if you're following the story so far, you will see that all of these characters have been pioneers in unusual times. They've been forerunners. They've been first generation Christians, not just in their families. First, they were the first to know God from their communities. And they were, not only did they know God and walk with God, they also had to propagate the gospel, evangelize their community. There was a measure of revelation that they had. And I like to always stress that when I look at us, when I look at these stories and I look at ourselves, I really just beg God and said, have mercy upon me and upon my generation, because I have so much. These people didn't read the Bible. I said, I've read the Bible back to front to back, circled round, inside out, and I'm like, in my life. But has my walk with God, has my life shown even a measure of what I'm called to? It said, to whom much is given, much is expected. I just wonder, these people had very little. They ran. They were not constrained by the little they had. They ran all out with it. And because of that, we're standing on the legacy of their work, imperfect as it may be, because nobody is perfect. And God, something that somebody explained to me one time, said, God always knew that polygamy is not the way. God had never wanted polygamy. He wanted, one man, one wife, just as Christ to the church. That is a model that we're given. But why did he allow polygamy in the Old Testament? Why did he even say to David, if you wanted more wives, you could have asked me and I could have given it to you? God said it himself. If you wanted, you should have just told me and I would have no problems giving it to you. Somebody once explained it to me that, that wasn't God. Dealing with the issue of polygamy wasn't God's focus at the time. There were more important, more critical things that he wanted to build and address in humanity, because he knew that the other things will come later. And I look at our lives today and I wonder, what are the things that God has decided, not that he has turned a blind eye on, but the next generation is going to look at us and say, yeah, you guys didn't get that right. The Bible is very clear on this. This is the heart of God. Yet the mercy of God continues to cover us and allow us to come in the way that we are. But it's still an onus on us to seek out the heart of God, to seek out what God is really calling us to. Because I don't want anybody to go away from this meeting saying, well, it was okay for him to have multiple wives, so it's okay for me to do this, it's okay for me to that. I don't think that's what we're communicating. I hope that's not what you're hearing from us. We're not saying it's okay. We're saying this is who this man is, who these men were. This is how they lived. These were the contributions they had, and these were the limitations of, we've seen how even those 6 wives cost that generation so much. So it wasn't without its own consequences. It cost the generation, a combination that would have done what we can't even dream of today. So I wanted to just make sure that that message is brought on clear. If you disagree, if you have a different opinion, we're very happy to yeah. DB is echoing it, that it cost him a lot. So want to look at the end of his life. He died in a very interesting way. I will tell the story. It isn't written, the account, the full account as I know it isn't captured in this volume, this book, but there's a smaller book that talks specifically about the life of Omotunde Omoni, about how he died. I think after Babalola died, he said to people, he's always known that he was a conductor to Babalola's driving. So Babalola was a driver and he's the conductor. They understood they were called into ministry together. And now that the driver of the bus is dead, there's no need for the conductor, is what he said. So he said to his people, my time is up. It's just a matter of time. Babalola has gone. There's no more work for me to do. I'll soon be going. And 6 months after he died, but he took time to settle his affairs as much as he could settle them. And interestingly, what the account that I want to share with you, this one, DB, as you all know, they've told me some time ago, he shared it with me that he was sitting down one day, I don't know what he was doing, and he overheard a conversation happening in heaven, in the heavens, where Babalola was giving an account of his time on earth. And God had asked the question, so why didn't you work with the partner that I sent you, that person that I put you guys together to do this? And Babalola said, well, the man had many wives. I'm paraphrasing, but he was mixed with all kinds of things. And that was what hindered it. In short, he put the blame on Omotunde. And Omotunde overheard this and said, can you imagine? No, this is unfair on me. I have to go and defend myself. I have to go and speak. I have to go and speak for myself. I can't let them get away with what Babalola has had to say about me. I need to go and tell them my own version of the story. And it was, I think, maybe a few days, a few hours after this that he died. He passed on to glory. And I was like, I had mixed feelings about that. I mean, I had mixed feelings reading that. Like, it's good to know that your time is up and to be prepared, but did he really have to go? Could he not have continued the work? Or is that just the way that it is? Is that just the way that it is, that if you're called into something and maybe your partner is no longer in existence, or is that really, are you tied? Is your life also tied that way to the work that you're called to do and the person that you're called to serve or to work alongside? I don't know, I would appreciate people's comments, and it's just one of those ones that I have an open question that I would like some thoughts and perspective. Okay, so I think this is where we're really coming to the close. And in closing, I know that I'm jumping this and I'm rushing this, apologies. But I want to give Sonyade and Chineye this time to give us your closing words or your final thoughts, or anything that you think that we haven't had that is important information to share that we haven't quite brought on.
I think I'd said sort of my closing thoughts, but one thing I would add is that such was his power that people did have cause to question the source of his power, including at least one of his wives. But the way I thought about it was that surely we can't be saying that a person of God cannot have such power. It can only be a person of the enemy. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to stress again what she just said. That was so powerful. That this man possessed such immense power that people wondered, really? If I would paraphrase it, this can't be God. Can this really be God? This power is too much. You know how we tend to say when something is so potent, we say it works like magic. And I've always questioned that. Why do we always refer it to the dark side? Why is it the dark side that seems to in our parlance seems to have more potency. And, you know, if the result comes quickly, it works like magic. If it surprised us, it was like magic. There's something wrong in our understanding, or there's something wrong in the way that we perceive God and the power of God to work. I think we've had limited exposure, limited encounters with the raw power of God, and perhaps we need to be baptized with it, so it will change our language and change our understanding of God. So that's the book there that Tolu is projecting, the book that I referred to, that's specifically about Emmanuel Omotunde. Chineye, your turn now.
Okay, so my final words are that the story of these two men just inspires me, and I believe inspires other people to just keep trying to be better, because one of the things I take away is that these people were not perfect. They were all trying to be perfect. They were all trying to, do what God had told them to do. But the fact is that because they believed in this, so it didn't matter that they had their flaws. They just always moved on. And it happens sometimes that we just feel, oh, I've committed this sin, I'm like this, I'm like that, and you're discouraged. But I don't think we should be discouraged. We should keep aspiring at every point in time to key into that will, that path and purpose God has given us, and just keep standing up all over and all over again. And also the other thing for me too is conviction, praying that God grants each and every one of us that power to be convinced and to act when He speaks to us, because these men acted from a place of confidence and self-assuredness that can only come, from God. And once you have that feeling, you're able to add. Look at Omotunde, he says this and it's happening because he has faith. So also praying that God gives each and every one of us faith, the mustard faith, and the faith that like a mustard seed that can do a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ladies. So that's really how we're wrapping up tonight. The great men, Father Michael Iweni Tansi and Emmanuel Omotunde, two great men who have laid the foundation of our faith today. They were very different, as you can see. One was in the prophetic and the power and miracles and healing, and one was just in the way that he lived his everyday life, a life of denial and a life of total consecration, as it were, to God, to the service of God, and to the service of the kingdom. And today we're talking about them. We really just bless them, bless the life that they lived. I think my closing words will be that I believe more and more in mantles. I read the stories, and one of the things I say to God, I said, God, the lands that these people come from, the places that they had their missions, their revivals, their evangelism, they worked miracles, still testify, because they never forget. Nature does not forget. It does not forget what has been done. And in this time of darkness in our country, I ask God, revive your work in the midst of the years. That's one of my heart cries, revive your work. I pray for people who either you are related to these people we've talked about, you're related to people who supported their ministry, gave to the ministry, or were impacted by the ministry. Your ancestors, your grandfather, great-grandfather or mother or somebody was impacted by it, or they gave their land, whatever it is, whatever way that people have contributed to the story that we hear of today. I ask that the Lord will revive that, will remember them, remember their lives for good, and that He will birth again new evangelists, new people with the anointing of Father Michael, and with the anointing of the Babalolas and the Daniel Orekoya and Emmanuel Omotunde, because we need the light of God to permeate every aspect of this nation. Those people didn't have mobile phones, they didn't have the devices, they didn't have the technology, and they did so much. We need again the revival of 1930, 1931, the revival that lasted for days, and so many people, the miracles that happened, nobody could deny. We need that to be done again, And I just pray that the Lord will release those mantles upon our generation, that our generation will carry it, and we will do even much more than they were able to do, because we have so much more. We have better understanding. We've read the book, we understand their struggles, and we can do so much better. That's what I would like to say in closing. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being consistent. Thank you, Coach Lillian. You showed up. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Ruki. Shola, I think she has left, and everybody who joins us. Next month is the final one. I can't believe we're on to the last. It has been 7-8 months of this. Thank you for coming all the time. So that will be the last one. And we're going to be looking at a woman. Yes, we're closing out with a woman, and that's so befitting. Yay, power to the women. That's so befitting. So I'd love for you to join us again and invite people. Bring your questions. Please send your questions, your thoughts. I'd love to be engaged. And because also the author of this book, gets to listen to some of these recordings, it's good for us to engage, so he knows how people who are engaging with it are thinking, the questions people are asking, the challenges that they are having. And I think that also is a gift to him. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Thank you, Soyade and Chineye. Thank you. I deeply appreciate it. Good night. Tolu, over to you.
Thanks, Roberta. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.